eu já tentei fazer isso, mas perdi-me, porque eu a pé não sei o caminho. Estás a ver? Eu cheguei a Telheiras e eu depois fiquei tipo, agora como é que eu daqui me meto no...
Desde com o GPS e com o ouvido.
Mais ou menos, assim, né? O meu telemóvel já é barato. Estar com a app e estar a ver o caminho, vai-se cagar todo.
O link está na página do Facebook.
E eu cheguei ali a Telheiras, cheguei à parte da estação e fiquei tipo, ok, agora daqui eu saí de carro, mas eu não saí muito bem a pé, porque o caminho que faço de carro não dá para ir a pé, porque é autoestrada.
E é mesmo sendo com o GPS, estás a dizer que, ok, vais a pé,
não, eu percebo a pé.
diferente.
Eu percebo a pé, eu percebo que a pé não podes ir para a autostrada e eu mando por um caminho.
Mas então aí dá um trajeto muito mais complexo, não é?
Sim. E é por isso que dá os tais 40 e dá a maratona. Se não fosse através do complexo, eu dá a maratona. Meu, agora estou a curtir mais fazer estas cenas, tipo, em vez de andar às voltas a correr num sítio qualquer, não, mano, eu vou à cidade próxima e é bué, é fixe, tipo, estás a morrer, mas tipo, eu não levo carteira, não levo nada, eu não tenho outra hipótese a não ser arrastar-me até casa. Isso é um bom exercício mental. E agora tenho divertido bué com isso.
Não sei se há algum caminho fixe, se nem que é o pé de Caçanha, tipo, tens a linha de Cascais. Não sei se para a linha de Cascais conseguias ir até ao Guincho, por exemplo. Mas tens até para fazer corridas de 30 km ou os atletas na Papa fazem isso a dizer. Se quiseres fazer tipo mais, já mais podes começar a subir Sintra também.
Sim, eu também já pensei em ir para os lados de Sintra. Faço-me para os lados de Lisboa, porque é o que eu conheço melhor. Sei mais ou menos andar a pé. Mas já, ainda me perco um bocado assim, chego cá. Por fazer cenas a pé não tem nada a ver com fazer cenas a pé. Acho que pois é mais complexo. Nem eu tive que arranjar um político, eu não tenho que essas cenas eu já tive. É fixe, mas agora tenho nada com fazer isso. A cena é, eu nem vou muito rápido, tipo, a minha cena não é rápida, a minha cena é só tipo, quero ir e voltar, só que se eu consigo fazer isso, e se eu consigo fazer isso, tipo, há um achievement brutal, não consigo fazer.
É consistência, já me estou a ouvir música, parece uma música que dá uma boa pica, farta-me todo, tipo, passas tipo a sprintar e já não dá mais.
É normal. Eu por acaso não consigo ver com música porque eu não trago nada aos ouvidos, tipo, faz-me bem confusão. Mas eu estou a ver se a vez daqueles clip-ons, não vem mesmo lá dentro. Isso é que me faz confusão.
A cena, tipo, se conseguires ouvir, tipo,
porque me faz bem confusão, também gosto de os ouvidos tapados e tipo, estou no meio da estrada.
Se faço isso na cenurita, pode lá com a bicicleta.
Sim, no fundo o gajo devia assim, manda para uma guita.
Então vá. Ok, então, primeiro de tudo, mais uma vez, bem-vindos a mais um Game Dev Meet. Obrigado a todos por terem vindo. Antes de começarmos, eu x tempo gosto de relembrar umas quantas coisas. A primeira, a qualquer pessoa que alguma vez esteja interessada em dar uma talk, 5, 10 minutos, um quarto de hora, isto é aberto a qualquer pessoa, de qualquer experiência, de qualquer nível, ok? Portanto, nós reservamos sempre um bocado de espaço para se alguma vez vocês tiverem um assunto que estão a falar, qualquer coisa, tiverem uma iniciativa, uma ideia, estejam à vontade, falem connosco, e o pessoal vem cá, fala um bocadinho, dá uma talkzinha para toda a gente. Já fizemos isso umas quantas vezes. A sério, ofereçam-se, é uma boa maneira de darem a conhecer o vosso trabalho, quem vocês são, portanto ofereçam-se, não tenham problemas com isso, não se atenham. Isso é uma boa maneira também de ter exposição e aproveitar os mitos para isso. A segunda coisa é, a Ludoteca, como sabem, é um grupo basicamente de voluntários, são pessoas que querem ajudar a dinamizar a comunidade. Este grupo é aberto a qualquer pessoa, isto não é um grupo fechado, qualquer pessoa pode participar, qualquer pessoa pode se juntar. O funcionamento da Ludoteca é completamente flat, significa que não há hierarquia, portanto qualquer pessoa tem uma voz. E é uma questão de iniciativa, juntarem-se. Há aqui várias pessoas que estão aqui que são da Ludoteca. Portanto, se alguém tiver interesse, falem comigo, qualquer outra pessoa, comuniquem-nos pelo Facebook, qualquer sítio, e eu gostava de ajudar, e é só isso. Okay? Não há assim nada mais para fazer. Se quiser organizar, por exemplo, um Game Dev Meet, Eu tenho sido eu porque sou uma pessoa que tenho voluntarizado, o Wilson chegou a organizar vários, o Diogo organizava antes, portanto, isto é uma questão de voluntariado. Então, quem quiser fazer qualquer coisa, quer ajudar a comunidade, pode e deve. De resto, eu fico por aqui, já vamos começar a talk, mas antes disso, o Wilson tem aqui uma palavra para falar, portanto, atenção.
Olá a todos, boa tarde. Eu vou tomar só 5 minutos do vosso tempo. Eu estou a organizar a Neurogame Jam em conjunto com o pessoal de São Paulo Mão, como o Tiago Tendera, o Gatam Agarwal, que são neurocientistas, e portanto, e também em conjunto com o Filipe Luz da Universidade de Lusófona, que é o coordenador do curso de videojogos. Qual é o objetivo desta Game Jam? É juntar neurocientistas com criadores de jogos. Portanto, eu acho que consegui enganar os neurocientistas a participar nisto, porque acho que nós vamos tirar muito mais partido do conhecimento deles do que eles do nosso, não sei, espero bem que estar enganado, não sei, mas tu poderás dizer melhor se falar sobre isso, mas acho que é mesmo uma proposta interessante, porque eles têm imenso conhecimento sobre como é que funciona o comportamento humano, como é que nós tomamos decisões, como é que uma série de coisas que são extremamente úteis para o nosso trabalho. Especificamente, eu, game designer, gosto imenso de saber sobre isso, porque faz todo o sentido. Eu estou a detalhar as experiências, a conduzir os jogadores a fazer algo, portanto é muito importante sabermos, em vez de andarmos em experiência empírica a tentar chegar lá, se calhar se tivermos alguma base científica conseguimos chegar lá mais rapidamente, e esse trabalho já foi feito. E portanto, qual é a proposta desta Game Jam? A proposta é, não sei se vocês já participaram em experiências de jogos com jogos científicos. Pronto, geralmente os jogos, quando são criados para estes propósitos, são um bocadinho menos apelativos, porque são um bocadinho mais funcionais e práticos. Portanto, a ideia é um bocado trazermos a nossa parte de entretenimento e de imersão do jogador e de ficar na experiência de jogo e juntar à parte analítica e de experiências válidas científicas que estes jogos científicos têm. Ou seja, qual é o desafio concretamente? Nós vamos estar acompanhados por neurocientistas que nos vão lançar vários temas, que vão nos ajudar também a explicar como é que devemos tratar os temas, ou seja, a parte científica, a parte de validação da experiência e do jogo, e depois nós vamos ficar na nossa parte criativa e mais emotiva e de experiência de jogador e tentar chegar a um meio termo de ver como é que conseguimos criar jogos que sejam experiências válidas cientificamente, mas ao mesmo tempo que sejam apelativos para qualquer pessoa. Ou seja, uma pessoa qualquer que desconheça a história da criação daquele jogo, poderia jogar aquele jogo a pensar que estava a jogar um jogo como o Super Mario ou outra coisa qualquer que seja apelativo e não tanto uma experiência de laboratório. Portanto, a proposta é no próximo mês, em maio, de 11 a 13 de maio, na Universidade de Lusófona. As inscrições estão abertas no neurogamejam.com ou no Facebook Neurogame Jam, onde vocês devem seguir para estarem atentos às novidades. A inscrição tem um custo, são 5 euros. E porquê é que custa 5 euros? Nós, normalmente um lanche custa mais ou menos 5 euros, nós gastamos sempre dinheiro na Game Jam na parte de comida, seja refeições, seja lanche. Nós, obviamente, por 5 euros não conseguimos oferecer refeições aos 3 dias, de jantar e almoço, mas conseguimos oferecer lanche para vários momentos do evento. Portanto, assim fica coberta essa parte. Vocês vão ter cafés e chás e essas coisas todas para além da comida. Mas, em contraponto, temos também prémios. Os prémios vão ser detalhados na próxima semana, em princípio, portanto estejam atentos ao Facebook. E participem, inscrevam-se e qualquer dúvida que tenham, qualquer coisa que queiram perguntar, ou perguntem através das redes sociais, ou falem comigo e com o Tiago para nos ajudarmos. Agora, depois do evento, depois da apresentação. E é isto. Obrigado pela vossa atenção.
Obrigado. Bom, vamos então para o evento principal. Nós hoje vamos ter o prazer de falar com o Daniel Demurgy. Para quem não sabe quem é, ele já há de se apresentar, mas direi apenas que é das pessoas mais influentes, especialmente do lado indie da indústria dos videojogos. É a pessoa que os indies, quando têm de testar um jogo, chamam em número 1, porque é basicamente a pessoa que começou a revolução indie antes do Indie Game The Movie. Portanto, é a pessoa que começou a fazer coisas quando ainda ninguém estava a fazer coisas. Eu, pessoalmente, foi a pessoa que me fez entrar sequer neste mundo, portanto, para mim é especial este momento. Vamos lá ver se ele nos atende. Ora bem. Estás em primeiro lugar, é verdade. Daniel, por que não aparece logo aqui? Daniel. Ups. Está ali. Convite enviado.
O que queres fazer?
Pronto, bem.
Acho que a minha câmera tem um zoom enorme, portanto vocês põem em alto destaque. Vou ver se o Daniel aceita.
Estás aí mesmo à frente a fazer uma perturbação.
Eu por acaso vim para a frente porque eu estava sem
Exato,
óculos.
olha, viste, a tua nota depende disso.
Não, fogo. Por acaso eu estava a pensar.
Hello?
Hi, Daniel, can you hear us?
Yes.
Hi, thanks. Can you see everyone? Well,
Yes,
not
I can
everyone.
see everybody. Hey, everybody. How are you doing?
Hey. Let me get here. Hi.
Hey, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you? I don't know where I'm going to sit. Would you, any of you? Sorry, thank you. Okay, so Daniel, to start off, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, tell a little bit who you are, what you've done, and that's it, basically.
All right. My name is Daniel. My last name is pronounced Benmergui here at home. English speakers usually pronounce it Benmergui. I'm fine either way. I live in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I've been doing independent video games for 10 years now. I just turned 40. So yeah, 10 years of doing this. I made a few games when I started in 2008. Some art games, which were a new thing by then. Those were very small video games with an artistic intent behind them, and not just being fun. I was doing that when that movement just started as a movement, as a thing that existed. Here's this movement of people trying to make art with video games. So I was there at that time. Then I shifted a bit and started making a game called Storyteller, which is a video game about building stories. A game that gives you a dramatic goal, like make a murder jealousy, or make somebody fall in love with their uncle, or stuff like that. And then you place characters in a comic strip to build a plot that fulfills those dramatic goals. So I started prototyping that game. I worked on that game for a few years. It ended up winning a new award at the Independent Games Festival, which is sort of like a Cannes or Sundance for video games. Then I stopped working on that game before shipping it because there were some problems that I could not figure out. And I decided to take some time off to make something else. And that time off turned out to be about 4 years. I started making another game called Ernesto, which is a puzzle game in which you cannot cross your own path. And then we were commissioned to make a spin-off of that game called Fidel, which is also a game about not being able to step on your own path, but it's actually a roguelike, not so much a puzzle. It's called Fidel Dungeon Rescue. We shipped it at the end of last year, and we keep updating it. We keep doing stuff on it. And soon, I'm probably going to announce that I'm going to go back to working and finishing Storyteller. I haven't announced it yet, so don't repeat this. But
We won't.
That's what's going on right now with my life. Of course, many things happened along the way, but I don't know what you guys are interested in. So
That's fine. Actually, just to also repeat this, so it's a Q&A session. That means anyone can participate. So at any point, if anyone has a question, feel free, just ask away or put your hand up. If no one's asking a question, I'll just go on with some of the questions. But Again, if anyone has a question, feel free. Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay,
I can
so-
answer questions about anything. Actually, you can ask questions.
I actually
Go.
found it very interesting that you started making artistic games, especially when there weren't that many. I was always very in love with art, and I'm more into art, so this definitely interests me. And I was wondering, before you started making games, what exactly did you do? For example, I was a graphic designer. I was in graphic design. I was studying that. So that the visual part is very important to me. What made you gain such an interest in this part of the game design?
Right. So that's an interesting question, actually. This happened. This happened when I was 30, right? And I work like clockwork in that every 10 years I do a small revolution of my life and do something else. I mean, most of us do eventually, but I'm very precise with it. So by the time I'm 30, I changed something big, and now I'm 40 and I'm changing something big. So at that time, I was before working on independent games. I worked for 10 years, mostly as an employee for software companies and Gameloft, which was a very big video game company at the time. But I had a technical job, so I was leading the lead programmer of a studio with 120 programmers. So when I decided that I really wanted to start making my own games, I wanted to do games that are actually surprising in an unexpected way. For some reason, that's what I felt most attractive to me, more than making regular gamey games. At that time, I was more into I want to do something that people really do not expect. At the same time, I was trying to break into the video game industry at the time. Nobody knew I existed, right? I was just a cog in a very big corporate machine. So I wanted to sort of do something special and unusual when I started making video games. And at the time, I felt attracted to making things about human issues more than just entertainment or telling stories. I am not really interested in telling stories. It's not something that I feel a strong pull towards. So I was like, well, what do I do? I need my games. In order to do what I want, I need my games to be small. They need to be small, manageable. They need to be unusual and surprising, and I want them to be about subjects that are about people, not things or not just killing time or entertainment. And it just happened that I had these images in my head. Like, I am a very visual person, so my ideas come in the form of images usually. And at the time, I had these images that I kept having that ended up being the basis for all of my games at the time. Like one of them was these two characters. One was sitting on the moon, and the other one was sitting on a boat, and that ended up being "I Wish I Were the Moon," one of my first art games. And then I had this image of a woman, just drowning or dying, like falling in water, like falling into the depths of very deep waters. That ended up being the basis for Today I Die, which that game was a finalist actually in the festival once. And eventually, I kept drifting towards something more conceptual. Like Storyteller is more like a conceptual game, not so much an artistic expression, but it's more like I'm really interested in the subject of building stories, and I want to make a game about that. This was a very long-winded answer. Sorry.
It's like you want to express yourself through creating a game.
Yeah, and I had no idea. I had no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I only had the images in my head, and I was like, okay, I have an image. How I turn that into a game. So if you play those games now, you will realize that there's not a lot of system complexity behind those games. They're mostly a moving vignette, right?
Thank you.
Because I didn't know how to do any better.
Well, okay, but there's actually something you said that interested me. You said you weren't interested in telling stories. However, you know, you were doing and still doing a storyteller, which is a game about building stories.
Yeah.
My question to you is storyteller kind of like your approach to how to solve what I call like the narrative problems in video games? The idea that games are an interactive medium, stories normally are linear. Storyteller is all about manipulating that. So is it your way of thinking of a systemic way of telling stories and not exactly a story per se to tell? Is
Right,
that
I see. So one thing I noticed when I was making Storyteller is that, you know, we watch a lot of TV shows. I know maybe you watch Game of Thrones or The Killing or the Paper House or whatever, right? There's many TV shows, and there's many movies that we watch, and we read books, maybe novels, and by doing that, we sort of train ourselves to sort of consume stories, right? Maybe you're watching a TV show and you can start predicting what is going to happen. Like, oh, this character, actually, he's going to do this to these other characters. This is what's going on. And then it happens in the show or not. But we're trained to think about what's going on in these stories that we're being told, right? We learn the visual language. We learn plot devices, and we train ourselves to consume these stories. But what I notice is that if I sit you down, even if you watch a lot of TV shows, if I sit you down to write a TV show, right? If I ask, okay, now make me a TV show. You've been consuming these police detective things for ages now. Can you now make one for me? And the moment I do that, you can sort of realize that being able to receive the narratives, receive the stories, is a very different skill than being able to build those stories yourself, right? It's in a different part of our head doing the thing. So what I like about Storyteller is that it's a different relationship with stories. Most games are about, you explore a story. Maybe there are cutscenes and you do some stuff, and then a cutscenes comes, or maybe you just pick small bits of story, like Skyrim, for example. You just walk around this huge world and you pick up small bits of story in the world. Or a more linear game like Florence or Heavy Rain or whatever, in which you're given, or Telltale games like Walking Dead and all that, in which they give you small branches or small decisions to make in a pre-written story. Those things are very interesting, but I was more drawn towards what happens if I give you the basic universal tools to build plots using characters and stuff. How does it feel to do that? Do you actually enjoy it? Maybe you watch soap operas, but what happens if you need to make one, right? Or just figure out or make a plot twist or whatever. What's the plot twist? This character needs to die. How is this character supposed to die, right? What's the most interesting way this character can die? Those are questions that nobody asks so far of people, and that's what I find interesting about Storyteller. It's not actually about stories per se, because the stories in Storyteller are quite simple, are very universal. I mean, it's suicide, murder, infidelity, heroes, greed, inheritance, parenthood, aging, you know, all very basic stuff. But those are I like because they're basic building blocks to make the stories we like to watch or read or whatever. I don't know. That's all. That was also a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, long answer.
I tend to talk a lot. If you let me. Yeah.
Anyone got a question? Yeah. Whatever. Anyone of the two.
Go. How do you come up with a puzzle? Do they come in a vision? You have a mental process? Random? You have an inspiration? I don't know. Let me know.
So I missed the first part of the question. How did I come up with what? With my games in general or a specific game? I missed that.
Repeat.
It
was asking, how do you come up with puzzles? As in, is it something you get inspiration from somewhere? Do you have a mental process to create them? Vision. You mentioned a vision.
So is it for storyteller or in general?
Yeah. With puzzles for games.
Okay, in general.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, there is a way. There's two ways, at least for puzzle games, and probably most other things in game design. There's sort of two ways of approaching a design problem, like how I'm going to make an interesting puzzle for this game. For example, let's grab that specific problem. I have this idea, they have these mechanics, and now I need to generate interesting levels for it, right? That fully explode those mechanics. How do you do that, right? Because when I come up with a mechanic, like for instance in Fidel Dungeon Rescue, you can walk in a grid, but you cannot step on your own path, and you need to maximize the amount of XP you get from killing monsters without dying, right? The thing is, how do I come up with interesting monsters or interesting layouts for that game, right? The thing is, when I start designing the game, I have no idea. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the mechanics of the game to even know what's interesting. I can even predict in my head how the different mechanics are going to intertwine with each other and produce interesting results. I don't know that. Nobody does. Here's one thing that I learned after hanging out with many designers that I really admire. I know a few people who are really awesome, amazing game designers, like say Jonathan Blow, right? Yeah. And one thing I learned by hanging out with these people is that nobody knows when they start their game. I mean, the good game designers make it interesting game design, okay? If you're copying another game or making a content-based game, it doesn't matter as much. But in terms of design, nobody knows how to make good stuff for their games when they start, because you are not familiar with it. You're not familiar with your own game. You don't understand your own ideas still. And the thing is, nobody else does. Not even the designers are much better at it than you are in general. Not even they know. Nobody knows. You're alone. You're alone in the world with a bunch of ideas that you had, and now you need to figure out how to make something good out of it. So there's two approaches to this problem that we call, in my group of friends, we called forward game design and backwards game design. Backwards game design is when you come up with a problem, you think of a problem to solve, like a puzzle, for example, and then you build the solution for that puzzle within your game. The most canonical example of this is when you make a labyrinth, right? One way you can make a labyrinth is by tracing the path first, the path that is going to take you to the exit, right? And then you fill in all the dead ends around it, right? That's one way of designing labyrinths. That's backwards game design. Same thing happens with adventure games. Adventure games are designed backwards, because the way the adventure games are designed is that, okay, this character needs to find the treasure, and they start from that. This character wants the treasure, but the treasure is locked behind the door. So now they had to figure out how to open the door. Now it turns out the door is locked, and there's a key. So now they have to figure out where the key is. Maybe the key is split into two halves. Now they have to figure out how to get both halves of the key, right? And by doing that, you start building up an adventure game, right? With puzzles and all that. But I'm designing it backwards. You can literally see me going backwards. I start from the end and go towards the beginning, right? That's backwards game design. And forward game design, on the other hand, is different. With forward game design, what you do is say, okay, I have these mechanics. I cannot cross my own path. I need to kill enough monsters to make good XP, but I cannot kill so many that I die, right? Those are mechanics. Forward game design, what it does is say, okay, now lay out any ideas that you have that you think may be cool. Like, what happened, like for my game, for example, what happened if I make it so one level is all filled with the same monster, right? In this pattern, maybe it's a checkers pattern level, right? I have no idea if that is going to be a good idea or not. I have no clue. It's just one idea. I decided to start from there. And what I do is I sit down and start playing the game as if I was a player. As if this was an actually designed level that can be beaten and is interesting. And then play it as a player. And I see what happens there, and I pay a lot of attention to what's going on with me when I'm playing the game, right? Maybe maybe this level is not very good, right? Maybe it's not very interesting. Maybe I can't get very far. But suddenly I realize, hey, this 3-monster pattern that happens here got me to think about the different ways in which I can start tracing. Maybe if I go left or if I go right, that sector of the level is either impossible or very easy, right? And I start noticing those patterns. Maybe now next step is I build a level out of just those 3 monsters, right? What happens if I isolate that idea that seemed interesting into its own thing? And again, I start again. I play it as a player. And I pay attention. Is there anything interesting that I'm noticing here? And by doing that, what you're doing is becoming familiar with the ideas behind the game and discovering what's interesting about your own game and starting to realize, starting to build a trove of treasure of good ideas that you can use and you can build the game upon. One thing that is that I usually say when I give talks to people who are not involved with games is that we game designers are not really inventing our games. We're not doing that. And as an example is that what happens with chess, right? If I ask you guys who invented chess, you can probably come up with a couple of theories that are going around. Maybe this Iranian guy came up with it, or he said something from Persia or whatever. You know, whatever you think it came from. The question I ask is, did that guy actually invent all of chess? I mean, we still get books with openings, right? Or interesting plays in chess. Did that guy come up with all of that? Did he made all of that? And the answer is no. He just made a bunch of rules, right? He wrote down a bunch of rules and realized that interesting things happen when you have those rules. And then a lot of other people explored the consequences of those rules and wrote books about it and made the game more interesting and made tournaments and turned the game into a cultural object, right? And into a cultural thing, into culture. But then none of those people invented the game either, right? I can shoot everybody who has ever played chess. I can shoot every single last person who played chess. And if I keep the rules around, a lot of other people are going to come after that and came up with the same good ideas, right? So it's not that any of those individuals were important for chess. So the question remains, who invented chess then? Where did chess come from? Where is it coming from? And the answer is, chess was always there. Chess was there since the universe started. Chess was defined the moment we had rules about how the universe works. what the Iranian guy did was figure out a way. He found a corner of the universe, which are these rules that have consequences that were already there. So in a way, all he did was just found a small corner in the universe, and all the people who play chess explore it further, explore around it, right? But the thing is, that game was always there. It existed right there, and a lot of other games exist right in that space, right? So as designers, we're not inventing games. As designers, we are figuring out ways to find interesting games in the universe. So the universe is actually co-designing with us. The universe has game design in it. We're just finding it, all right? So what this forward game design thing does is allow the universe to talk, right? I don't know. I'm a human being. I just came up with these rules. I don't understand my own game. I don't know what the limitations are. I don't know what the interesting bits are, because but I suspect that there are interesting things if I keep digging, if I keep searching, right? So in order to find those interesting things, I need to listen. And in order to listen, I do forward game design, which is I try a small idea, I sit down and humbly play the game and pay attention to see if the universe is telling me that there's something interesting here. Now, the thing is, maybe it all sounds great, like, it's great, Daniel, let's all do forward game design, and it's all good. We're all going to find the best ideas about our games without us having to be geniuses. All we have to do is sit down and do some work, which is great. It's true. Forward game design is about that. It's about doing some work and realizing what's interesting is interesting without requiring you to become a genius that, in the shower comes up with genius game design. I have nobody who do it. I never knew anybody who could do that. Nobody's like that. It's all exploratory. But the thing is, you cannot do pure forward game design because you need a bit of backwards game design to come up with the mechanics, for starters. Like, why did I choose this mechanic of not being able to step on my own path? Where did it came from? It was not forward game design. It was nothing there. So there's something that needs to be worked backwards. So usually there's a hybrid between, I want to make a game about not being able to cross your own path. That's backwards game design. And that's good because it's a starting point. And then you can move forward based on that idea. Sometimes I say I have this very specific aesthetic goal. I want this game to feel, I want people playing this game to feel desperate, right? That's backwards game design because I'm coming up with what I want before I found the thing, right? That's backwards, but that's good because it allows me, when I'm moving forward, doing forward game design, it allows me to be attentive for stuff that makes the player desperate, right? More receptive to that. So game design is a hybrid between these two things. And some people, like, adventure game designers, go full backward game design, and pure puzzle games like Stephen Sausage Roll are pure forward game design. He found Stephen Sausage Roll. He actually is the designer of that game is the one that got farthest that I've ever known in forward game design. It's like he did forward game design. He said, okay, these are the rules for the sausages, how you cook them, and then he kept digging and said, hey, this is an interesting level. This is a cool level about the sausage because it uses this property of the mechanics and whatnot. But then he didn't stop there. He went, okay, what else can I do with that? And he kept digging and found another idea that is deeper than the original one. And then he kept digging. And now there's another idea that is deeper than that. So whenever you're playing, I usually use the metaphor that doing forward game design is like digging to find gems, right? You just keep digging, and you're going to pull off a lot of dirt, mud, and a lot of this stuff you pull is going to be useless. You'll have to throw it away. But every now and then, you're going to find a gem. And that gem is something that, as I said before, is in the universe. It's not something that you put in there. It's just something that you found. So it's sort of like a gift. Well, Stephen Sausage Roll, what he did is he found the gems as well. He kept digging through the dirt, found the gems, threw them away, and kept digging. And then he stopped finding gems and started finding, I don't know, like Lovecraftian things down there. I don't know. He kept digging until we no longer understand what he's pulling out of there, right? It's too weird. It's too deep. is to like basic, primitive, very strange things, very ancient things, if you want. So he is that game is, I think, the best example out there of forward game design. Let me see if I remember the question. All right. Yes, it was about vision and inspiration and all that. That's a good question because the answer is hard to pin down. Many good ideas that I had while doing something else completely, like going to watch theater or meeting new people that are interesting, or maybe reading a new book, or maybe playing another game, playing some game that just triggered an idea in me or whatever. Definitely, I cannot sit down to be inspired. It doesn't work that way. I mean, being inspired is not work. It's not something I can schedule to do. And I don't have a technique for it. I don't know anybody, none of my game designer friends have a system for doing this. It's mostly you go out, you do new things that forces your brain to think differently, to be in a different place that you're used to. And eventually your own head is going to start making connections. And one of those connections is going to feel great. And then, maybe it's time to try something there, right? So yeah, it's that simple. I don't know.
You cannot schedule ideas. How can you schedule a game jam where you sit down and have lots of ideas and given the time? Isn't that what happens?
Can you repeat the question to me?
Is questioning the idea, because if ideas, or in this case, the question is, if ideas are hard to come by, how are you supposed to get an idea out of a game jam where you have a limited amount of time?
I don't think he said the ideas are hard to come by.
I think you had a different interpretation of what just said.
Basically, they're everywhere. You can find them everywhere. But if you said something I didn't completely agree with, which was you just sit down and wait for an idea to appear. It's not going to. Sometimes a very depressing game that explores the emotional depression someone's going through can come by just because a person was sitting down and not feeling inspired and was like, "Oh, this would be a thing I could work with." So
yeah, sure. I mean, I know very few people who do that. Actually, I consider it sitting down, being in a very intense emotion, in a state of intense emotion, whether I don't know you're depressed, or you just broke up with somebody you care, or something important to you just died. When you're in those high energy states of mind, some people are able to turn those into games. But I thoroughly admire those people because whenever I'm in those states, I don't have the energy to go through making a game. It's just too difficult, too hard. So yeah, maybe you're not inspired and you can make a game about not being inspired. That's great if you can do it.
They know almost everything about making a game, and it's somewhat easier for them to do the mechanical part. And an idea can be very simple.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't need to make something that takes so much idea building behind it.
However, I think the question becomes,
yes.
I think the question becomes, it's about the meaning, maybe. Of course, you can come up with an idea from anywhere. The point is, how valuable is that idea? Like, ideas do have different values, right? But anyway, we're getting out of it.
Yes. I definitely.
I was
sorry
just going to.
One thing I'm going to say about that is that I do feel a lot of envy for I don't know, painters, for example, or people who can draw, because they can transform the impulse to do things into a drawing or a painting without needing your mind to be so much into it. mean, you can flow, right? There's
Someone-
no way I can flow with any of my work. There's no way, because I need to figure out programming problems, right?
Exactly.
So it's not like I can program in pain. If I'm programming in pain, my program is going to fail. And I'm going to fail at programming the thing because I am in pain. So that's why I don't even try to do those things. Maybe.
Yeah, I was just talking about that part, not exactly about, oh, I'm gonna get up now and make a game, but I already have a concept. That was more the idea. But I told you, when somebody is depressed, I don't think they're going to be able to get up and actually be able to do something very easily. It's gonna be quite.
I think that's way feasible if you're looking into the past in this sense. If you were depressed at some point and you saw your progress through this depression, you can come out to the other side on a valid or easier to find game.
Yeah, that sounds great. I sort of did it with Today I Die. It was just I was just getting out of a very complicated situation with someone who was very depressed, and the game was sort of a bit of a retrospective on that, if you want. However, one thing that I noticed is that, like, if you're going through an intense emotion, once you work through it and you are on the other side, going back to it to make a game about it is like
very difficult. It's something
very difficult.
Very, because
like you went through all of this pain to get to the other side. You don't want to go back there.
It's not a joke, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do with a very difficult part of my life that I just got out of. So that's why I was talking about it, because going through and reliving and having to play through these things that while programming and everything, I tried a little bit and it's very difficult. But at the same time, if we feel very strongly about it and it's something we really want to make, I think it can also be a drive. The pain that we went through can be a drive to help us make the game.
Sure. I mean, if you feel strongly about it, maybe it will help other people. One danger when you do that kind of retrospective things on states of mind in the past is that your mind tends to want to rationalize a lot, because you don't want to relive the pain. So your mind tends to take over and try to make choices that are not really
what should be done at the time.
Yeah, your mind is going to try to find ways around going through the pain, and that is actually acts against the game itself. But even then, even if you go through that, if you still have the energy to do it, no matter how it comes out, it's a good thing. It's fine. It's good. It's good to do it anyway, even if you realize you're beating around the bush a bit with the game itself. Even then, it's worth doing. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just 1 second. I was looking at the time. I know we've gone over the time that we said we were going to do this. So my question: it feels like people still want to talk, but from your side, you want to go on a little bit further, or
I have no problem. I mean, eventually I'm going to run out of voice because I have a bit of sore throat. But until that happens, I'm fine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'll do a quick comment so we can move on to.
Wait. There's somebody with a question right behind you.
I know there's a few questions there. Just a quick comment. Earlier we were talking about backwards and forward design. I found it interesting because both in sculpture and architecture, those are actually called formal design and conceptual design, and exactly the same process. Besides, just different names for the same thing. And also the same coincidence is both professions actually come up with the same conclusion that you did, which is that, for instance, sculptures have a tendency to say that I didn't do that sculpture, it was already there, I just took out the extra, which is also something that is a typical thing in architecture. So I find it interesting how things that actually exist from different disciplines of design and other areas translated to game design to something similar, but with a different experience to how to actually approach it. But it's the basic same framework.
Right.
And it still exists now. Right? And there's also something I would like to add, which is, yes, concept backwards, forwards. I use those terms now. Backwards and forwards design. You need both, but also one thing that's interesting is personality terms. Some people have a big tendency to more think in a more conceptual way, and more formal way.
Mhm.
So people who have tendency to be very formal will do a lot of basic backtracking, so backwards design. More conceptual people will try to look for forward game design, which is interesting. But this is something you can actually train yourself. You either be a little bit more formal or more conceptual. But yeah, a very interesting parallel
the nasty thing about forward game design is it's very hard to teach. I tried giving a couple of talks about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I failed to get a message across about what I actually mean by it. I have the theory. I have the theory that it's a kind of thing that you can only learn by watching someone do it, and you know, watching someone who's trained at it do it, and then you start realizing, oh, this is what it's about. Actually, it happened to me with Jonathan Blow while he was making The Witness. I you know, sat down with him to do game design for it, and I started noticing how he approached things, and it was strange. It was weird. I never thought of it that way. And that's how I got a sense of what I mean by forward game design. In my own case, something that happens is that I streamed a couple of times. I streamed myself doing game design for Ernesto. And I remember one particular day in which I just chose to make a level that had 4 groups of monsters on the corners, and you know, the exit was at the top, and you started sort of in the middle. And I was like, is this level solvable? Can you actually solve this level? And I had no idea if you could or not, right? But then I started playing the game, like trying to solve the level as if it was a solvable level. But I was doing it live in front of a lot of people. And after I spent 20 minutes playing with a level that was apparently unsolvable, people started getting impatient, right? People watching were game designers as well, right? And they started getting impatient, like, oh, this is not good enough. The level needs to be bigger, or this mechanic needs to be different, so you can solve this level. So change this. This is unsolvable. Daniel, stop. Everyone was like, Daniel, stop doing this. The level, you cannot solve this level. So you need to redesign it. This is not solvable. And in 1 second, I was like, this is it, and solve the level. And everybody was like, whoa, that was unexpected. And it's that's a sign of, you know, forward game design, is that I did not give up. I was like, I also suspect this level is not solvable. I also feel the temptation to stop and change the level to make it more solvable. But if I do that, if I give in so quickly, I'm not going to find the gems. So I need to keep digging. And sometimes it happened one time that I spent half an hour with a level that was actually unsolvable. It was not solvable. So sometimes you pull out mud and dirt, and sometimes you pull out the shame. And the thing is, that level is now a very interesting level in the game, because it looks impossible. When you start playing it, it looks impossible. Like all the people watching me play thought, this level is unsolvable. You cannot solve this level. But actually, I know there is an answer, right? Because I found it. So I have a level, and I know it's an interesting level because it's misleading. It looks like it's impossible, but it actually is. So yeah, what I mean by forward game design is hard to explain. It's sort of a sense of when you need to stop and rethink the mechanics, or you need to, you know, go to do some backwards game design, because you cannot do pure forward game design. And sometimes it's like the wisdom to know when you have to stop and rethink some things, and when to keep going, like I did with that level, right? But I think that's why I think that game design should be taught by designing with masters, like having a master that is much better at doing game design, and sit down and do game design with them.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a theory. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. Go.
Hi. So my question is, as a game designer who also implements his own games, you have to do short projects, correct? But as a game designer, especially doing forward game design, you might come up with ideas that you don't really know if you can implement. When do you worry about implementation when you're thinking about the ideas when you're developing it still?
Okay, keep going. Finish the question.
Yeah, it's that. Do you commit to the idea while you're developing it, or do you first develop it fully in an abstract sense and only then you try to implement it?
No, usually what I do is I have this idea. I'm going to get working whatever I have, whatever I came up with. I'm going to try to get working as soon as possible. Mostly because maybe it's a bad idea, and I don't want to spend my energy thinking about an idea that is not going to pan out, right? So I think the line that separates, there's a line that separates, this is an interesting idea, and this is an idea that I want to try, right? There is a limit between the two things. Maybe I have a bunch of interesting ideas, but I don't think they're fleshed enough to try them out, right? So first of all, it needs to be an idea that I want to try out. But the moment I cross the line and I want to try out, the first thing I do is sit down and make it happen. Make it happen in the quickest possible way that I can, to see if it's interesting. And if it's interesting, I could probably do some forward game design, and that is going to tell me what I need to implement or not. Like, for instance, in Fidel, at some point, I noticed that by playing the game and watching other people play the game, I noticed that if I make very small levels for that game, and if I could know exactly what's the most amount of XP you can get in that level, it sort of becomes like a small puzzle game in which it's not just about maximizing XP, but it's about finding the actual optimal amount of XP in a small area, which is manageable. I mean, in the big levels, it's very hard to do. It's almost impossible to do. But in small levels, I can turn Fidel into a small puzzle game if I do that, right? But that requires me to implement a solver for the game that can figure out what the most amount of XP you can get on a particular level. I didn't have that. It was not implemented in game because since the levels are a bit procedural in that some monsters are placed randomly, I don't know for sure when I'm designing them what's the actual maximum amount of XP you can get in those levels. So I need to implement something that figures it out, and I need to be fast enough to run on my players' computers, and not make mistakes, and detect whether a level is interesting or not, which is an interesting problem, right? It's not a huge, massive, difficult to solve problem, but it's a problem that requires work and thought. And when I started, trying to do that, I thought I was not going to be able to make it run fast enough for people to be able to run it on their computers. But it turned out it was. But I was motivated by the fact that I felt it was a good idea to add it in the game, and it would feel good. So when I was implemented it, I knew it was going to work. So that pushed me to actually do it and make it happen, even if it was not immediately easy to make happen. So yeah, the thing is, it's better to grab the idea in its most simple form, make it happen, and let that idea tell you what's next, more than coming up with a framework of what you actually need for a game. But people are different. Maybe some people actually think about all of their game ideas before writing down a single line of code. Jason Rohr, who made Passage, and now 1 Hour 1 Life, Castle Doctrine. He made several very interesting games. He designs like that. He sits down and thinks what the core system of his game is going to be, and then he sits down and makes it happen. He's a lot less exploratory than I am. I cannot possibly do that. I can only grasp a very simple idea and then let exploration tell me what to do next. But we're all different, so I don't know. I'm speaking mostly through my experience.
That's what we're here
Long
for.
answer. Long answer again. I need to learn to shorten my answers here.
No, that's
All right.
great. Long answers give more information.
All right.
More question? Sure, shoot.
Hi, Daniel. So, as a profession, I'm a scientist, and I found it very interesting what you talked about forward and backwards game design, because I can really relate to that in the scientific process. So, let's say we have a hypothesis that we want to test. We can definitely approach it by either trying to predict what the result is going to be, and then falsify the hypothesis, or we can go about exploring this, creating this space that we believe can solve the hypothesis. Now, I struggled a lot. I'm a big fan of what you call forward design in this case, but I have struggled a lot with the external forces. And I would like to ask you, how do you deal with the external forces, the funding agencies, the wife and family to feed, and the time pressure? So that's my question.
Well, in terms of design, one thing that I try to do all the time was actually create conditions for myself to have the freedom to do this design in whatever way I saw fit. It's very hard to do in the academic world because your external forces are unavoidable. You cannot avoid external forces. Whereas what I do is like maybe the way I get money to make my games is sometimes I make a prototype of the game using my own rules, my own system, whatever. I make a small prototype, and then I go to people and say, hey, do you want to give me money to make this? But on one condition: you are going to give me money, but I'm going to decide how I'm going to do it. You don't get a say. And if they don't agree, then I don't sign up with them. But that's a freedom that I have, or that I work to have, or that I have the privilege of being able to have. But it's sort of, to me, it's sort of a given. And in a way, it's the reason why I'm not a scientist, because I don't want to deal with the stuff that you're dealing with. And that's why I didn't choose that path. Like I want people to leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I want to do my thing, right? And so I try to stay away from worlds that force me to do things in a particular way. This said, I spent 10 years being an employee. Being an employee is all about being told what to do and what you can do, you cannot do. So I have a bit of a first-hand experience on how that feels. That's why in my 30s, I decided to try to build myself a bubble of artistic arrogance where I can tell people to fuck off and let me do my own thing, right? So I work to build myself that bubble. You probably don't have you don't have the ability to do that unless you suddenly realize that a far relative from yours died and he was super rich, so you can buy a laboratory somewhere or whatever, right? So I don't really know how it's going to work out for you. I'm sorry about that.
I'm not 30 yet, so I have a few years.
Yes. Well, you still have time to tell everybody to fuck off. Question.
Thank you. You mentioned you stopped working on Storyteller because you didn't know how to proceed. And I went through a similar situation recently, and my question is, did you expect to pick it back up in the future? And was there more to coming back to it than just the passage of time and doing other things?
Well, I think two things happened. I mean, with Storyteller, I had these hiccups a few times. I made the first prototype in 2008, and I stopped working on it. In a few months, I picked it up again, and I made some progress. I had a small breakthrough, but I didn't know where to go from there, so I stopped for a few months, and I picked it up again, and I got another breakthrough, and then I worked on it for 2 years, and I realized that it was becoming solid enough that I could work with it and make an interesting game, until I got stuck again, and I went to do something else. I think there's many reasons why one gets stuck into making big creative things. It can happen for a different variety of reasons. sometimes it's because you're missing the right idea. Maybe you're on the edge of figuring something, having a breakthrough and figuring something out, but you cannot grasp it. You can't reach it, and you can't reach it, and you try and you try and you suffer because you feel like you should be able to figure this out and you don't, and you suffer until you get sick of it and then go do something else. And then one day you just look back on it and think, oh wait, it's this simple. I just need to do this other thing, and that solves the problem. It's fine, right? That's letting your mind do work on its own time. It's like outsourcing the problem, right? You need to solve this problem. You work on it, you work on it, you work on it, and until you get stuck and say, I'm not going to work on this problem anymore. I'm going to work on different problems now. Maybe I'll do a different game. Maybe I'll just get a job or whatever. And you just let the back of your mind work on the original thing. And maybe eventually it will get back to you and say, hey, you remember that problem you gave me a long time ago? I think I have an answer for that now. That's one thing that can happen. The other thing that can happen, which is what I suspect happened to me in the last time I dropped Storyteller, is that I wasn't very confident as a game designer back then, and the problem I was trying to solve was too big. So I stopped trusting myself to be able to solve the problem. And when you lose trust that you are going to figure it out, it's very hard to make any progress, and you get depressed, which makes the problem even worse. It's like a vicious circle. You're just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So when that happens, whenever you're feeling like you're not really happy or you're in pain or whatever, it's fine to go away. Just leave. If something hurts, just leave. Just go somewhere else. If it's not supposed to hurt, right? So now that I'm coming back to Storyteller, I feel like I'm more solid and self-confident game designer. Maybe I will have exactly the same. I'm going to pick up the same problems that I had back then, but I care less about them. Maybe my conclusion will be, this is an unsolvable problem in this game, and just going to suck it up and design the game despite this being a problem. And I'm going to not fight it anymore. So I have a different policy on how to handle the things now. And that's, I think, was what I was missing with Storyteller back then. So yeah, I don't know. That's my answer there.
That was super helpful. Thanks.
All right. Another question.
Guys, you want more? Sure, go.
Do you know about Jonathan Blow's new language? Do you have any thoughts on it? Are you any interest on it?
Can you repeat it for me?
Yeah, sure. Do you have any thoughts on Jonathan Blow, the fact that he's doing a new programming language just for games?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm hoping he finishes it. I hope he has a working version soon, which I estimate is going to take a couple of years. I am not fond of Unity. I am not fond of Unreal Engine. I am not fond of any engines. I think they're cool, but they are also a trap. And I kind of want to go back to programming in a more basic level, but I don't want to go back to C++. C++ is garbage. I don't want to program in it so anymore. I want to touch it ever again. It's like I feel dirty. I don't want to touch that. So maybe his language is going to be the thing that I need. One language that has all the benefits of C++, but it doesn't have any of the bullshit. And if it's designed thinking about making video games, maybe the library is going to be super useful and work well, and all the people involved are very smart, and I trust them. So maybe it would be finally I'll be able to program my games the way I want. Or maybe it will happen that I'm going to get too old and just hire people to program and not worry about it anymore. Either of those things could happen, but I'm happy that there's going to be options. Yeah.
Good answer. Okay, Daniel, I want to take a lot of your time. It's now 9. Do you feel, I don't know, you talk about your throat. You want to go on, or should we probably stop, right?
I could go for a couple more questions.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, Who's next? Go, please.
We can start.
Yeah.
For your storyteller game, have you explored the hero journey or save the cat beats? Have you found them useful for your storyteller game, or can you explore a little bit about it?
All right. So yeah, there's a few things that I found useful for storyteller in particular. One was Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics books.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with it.
Yes.
Understanding Comics is a really freaking awesome book, and if you are interested in art or communication, it's a very good read. It's a very, very good read. Another influence is a book written by a Russian guy the past century called Morphology of the Russian Folktale, which is a crazy Russian guy that what he did was he made a huge encyclopedia of Russian fairy tales and folk tales. He made a huge, massive amount of those stories. And he tried to reduce them to symbols. He thought that all those stories had many things in common, and he tried to figure out what they had in common. Okay, there's a character, there's a role, there is a villain, maybe, right? Or the mentor, or the trickster, or whatever, right? So he figured out there were roles in these stories, and those roles repeated many times. And he also detected some structure to the Russian folktales, like many times the stories start by somebody breaking a promise, right? Or somebody breaking a rule. Like, don't go out, like you and me and dad are going to go to town to the market. Remember, you must never go out of the house after 7. And of course, you know, the characters go out after 7. That's what allows the story to happen, right? So those interdictions are things that repeat themselves. So he tried to distill those ideas into an abstract language. So he actually gets to the point in which he reduces entire folk tales into a bunch of symbols. I think that's very crazy. And I'm not sure how useful it is, actually. It feels crazy. It feels like somebody with a tinfoil hat, like, going too far down the dark path, right? But I really did think that the part where he figured out the roles, like the villain, and you know, maybe it's a same character who could have different roles. Maybe the villain was also the mentor at some point. So those things were ideas that actually ended up being part of Storyteller, because they're so basic, so universal, that they were very useful to have. And another thing that I use a lot for Storyteller is I bought a few books that are summaries of classical stories, you know, all classical stories, like American novels, Shakespeare, Greek epic stories, or whatever. These books, what they do is a small summary, right? You don't want to read the whole thing. Don't you want to watch a movie? Just read a summary. It's fine. And I use those because those are reductions, right? They're often reduced to plots, because if you reduce Shakespeare to a paragraph, it's going to be about plot, right? You're not going to go about the characters and stuff, because you don't have room for that. It's all about plot, and Storyteller is a lot about plot. So what I get for free is hundreds of plots written by the best writers in human history in a summary. So I can just read it in the bathroom. One of the books is actually a bathroom. It's called a bathroom book. Because the summaries are so short, you can just read them in a session in the toilet, right? So that was very useful. Yeah, those are my sources for Storyteller.
Fantastic.
All right, question. Another question?
It's not exactly a question, but when you were talking about the Russian guy deconstructing stories to find the main archetypes, what I immediately thought of was something that I'm absolutely sure you've heard of as well. It's basically a site called TV Tropes that does exactly that with a huge list of almost everything. It takes almost every plot and a twist or normal things that happen various times in stories and just catalogs everything.
What's it called? I never heard of it.
TV tropes.
TV tropes.
TROP.
Yeah. I got it.
Yes, you must have seen it already because when I found
this is interesting. Yeah.
It's super useful. You have everything there. And what that Russian guy did, those guys have a lot of people with tinfoil hats.
Right. Well, that's good. I'll take a look at it. Thank you.
It helped me a lot when I was making some organizing my some stories that I needed to create. Sometimes I even just randomly searched some stuff I needed and found great ideas that came from really short descriptions. I think it's quite very useful. It's very interesting.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's fine.
By the way, this is something I a lot of times notice, but do you want to make a question? Want to question something out of us? Like
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you forced me. You forced me to introduce myself. So and now you also want me to figure out what to introduce you, to do an introduction to you as well. I mean, you tell me something if you want. Come on.
Me personally, or everyone?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Just tell me what you guys are doing. Why is there so many people in that room?
Well, so basically, the industry in Portugal, I don't know if we could even call it almost an industry, but we've had some issues along the years. There's also not a lot of money, so Portugal has like a few studios, actual registered studios that do work, and most of it is just indie small teams doing development. There's not really much of an industry in Portugal. So a few years ago, this happened a couple of times over the decades, but more recently, a few years ago, we really started to organize ourselves better, get to know each other, so we started creating a community. So for instance, this we're doing here is a monthly meetup. Right now it happens here in Lisbon and in Porto, which is at North. And we also do like game jams and we organize. So right now, one of the things here in Portugal is all about getting people to know each other, talk with each other, so they're not in isolation. For instance, for me personally, I spent, 2.5 years, 3 years just knowing no one and doing stuff by myself. And as soon as I got to know other people, it really went like, both the knowledge, the experience, and well, that's basically it. Especially experience, to know with each other. So that's really the core right now. And Portugal is also in a state right now where we're fighting also to get a few things like recognition from the government, because funding is really hard. When you make a company here, there's no kind of tax benefits, anything like that, nothing. And also the other thing that doesn't help us is Portugal doesn't really have a lot of funding for arts in general. So therefore, we're like at the end of the tail of that. So if arts have a problem, we don't even exist.
Right.
Yeah, so it's that's basically it. But the thing is, why we, for instance, try to speak with people like you and others and try to invite this and make people have this kind of interaction is also trying to transmit that even without funding or money or anything like that, there's no price on ideas, and there's no price on just doing something, and you can do something in your spare time. And a lot of, for instance, indie projects that start out of people in their bedrooms with no money whatsoever. And so right now, the idea here that we're, as a community, always trying to kind of convey to each other is that instead of trying to go for, the AAA and trying to just unite as we tried in the past, not very successfully, but try to make some kind of big ass projects, just trying to unite people and say, let's start small and grow step by step. So that's where we are right now. Most of the people here, I imagine, are students. A couple are professionals, 1 or 2 teachers, and a neuroscientist over there. So that basically explains a little bit what it is. But as a last note, I would say something that's an issue for us, but it's something that really speaking with other developers helps, which is
I'll speak personally. Even the best, for instance, game designer that I would know in Portugal would be at best what I call a junior game designer. So if I compare him, like for anyone that's experienced game designer that I've met internationally, the best people that I know that do game design in Portugal are still very inexperienced, and not only that, very unknowledgeable. So we have a knowledge problem here. For instance, there's a lot of video game teaching schools, but for instance, not enough people would know how to actually be teachers.
Yeah. Okay. So
that's where we are.
Right. Okay. So the situation you're in now is maybe one step behind our situation here in Argentina. We already set up some government grants and stuff, to send people to GC or funding for projects. It's hard to get them granted to you, but it's not impossible. Many people did. The government recognizes us as a potential economic force. We are not an economic force. We're as far from having a AAA studio as you are, which means no chance. The local industry is probably a bit bigger than yours, but not that bigger. And we are also fragmented into small indies and small studios now. Maybe you have 3 big studios. Big by big, I mean 100 people, not 1,000. But then it's all mostly just small groups of developers and indies. So what I often say when I found this situation, which is very common, it's the same situation in the rest of South America and South Africa as well. We are pretty much what the speech you just gave me is pretty much the speech we all have in those places. There's 2 things that I think about it. One is that if you keep pushing government to help, eventually it will. It may take a while. It may take a few years, and it may take some people to give a lot of their time to make it happen. Is what happened here. Lots of people, had to take it upon themselves to lobby, to go to this meeting with these fucking people. I'm super grateful to these people doing this, because I would not do it. I would not touch any of this with a 10-foot pole. But there were people doing this work, and it actually started paying off. At first, it was a joke.
Yeah,
it was really shitty. Maybe we got. There's some grants for TV, and the first victory was to be able to get grants for video games about TV. Right? It's super shitty. Nobody wants that, right? It's crappy. It's not good. But it was a first step. And then, the next step was to remove the requirement for, being based on TV. So now there's a grant for video games, right? So it's with government work, it's very small steps, but somebody or a group of individuals. We have an association here doing this work.
That's what we're doing.
They need to take it upon themselves to make this stuff happen somehow. And the other thing that I would say is that I'm not familiar with the culture. Sorry, what?
I was just going to say one thing regarding that. The shitty part is that the same people that are trying to do that for others are themselves developers. And so most of those people are actually sacrificing sometimes a little bit of their own career as game developers in order to do that.
Yes.
And that's shitty.
Yeah, that's shitty. So the way it worked most successful here, the moments in which it was the most successful, this association was the most successful, was when they, maybe somebody at a company has a very specific role, like at the studio, like maybe somebody just is in charge of getting money, getting projects for the studio, whatever. So that person is not required 100% of the time on the studio. It's required in small bursts, and maybe you can use the rest of the time of that person to do lobbying, right? So the people who are the most effective were people that could devote part-time of their time to do lobbying without, causing a huge problem for the studio. I don't know. I mean, you have to have those people. It's just, I don't know how to make that happen.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is that I'm not familiar with the culture in Portugal, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you guys think or what your relationship is with money or privilege or whatever. But one thing that I keep repeating is that if you have any sort of access to funding, even if it's your mom or your family or your friends or whoever, or yourself maybe, I don't know, there's no embarrassment to use those to make things happen. I know it's a problem in South America because, you're embarrassed if you need to ask your family for money in order to do what you want to do. Or you use the resources. For example, right now, in this exact moment, this is going to change, but in this exact moment, I'm going back to live with my family. I'm in my mother's house right now. I'm living here. I've been living here for a few years. I'm 40, all right? I'm 40, I'm living with a fucking mom. It's super embarrassing. But the thing is, it makes sense to use this resource, right? I don't pay rent. I don't have to worry about, I share food with my family. My expenses are a fraction of what they were when I was living with myself. So sometimes maybe making use of those resources is fine. It's all fine. You have to use them. If you have them, you have to use them somehow. I don't know. Yeah, that's one thing I think about all of this. And also having, you probably have that, but you're probably having conferences and stuff in the country is also very useful to get people to meet each other and spend time together, start projects together. I'm also for share information. Here's another thing that may be interesting. I don't know. Again, I don't know the culture in Portugal, but in South America, there's this culture that all your colleagues are actually competition. If you're an independent developer, other independent developers are, in a way, competition. Maybe they are competing for contracts to do contract work, or maybe they're competing for attention. They're competing for Steam. They're competing for whatever. In any case, there's in South America this feeling that you need to be protective with your information, and you need to be protective with your relationship to people, to your clients or your providers or whatever. To give you an example, Cartoon Network gives a lot of work for studios here. They usually hire small studios here to make small web games for Cartoon Network and stuff. And at some point, all these small groups were working for the same company, and they kept refusing to share information with each other because they were afraid that somebody else was going to take advantage of the information they have, of how much they asked for the last game, or what the terms of the contract were, or whatever, right? So they refused to do that. And you know what Cartoon Network did? It grabbed all the studios and picked the one that asked for the least amount of money, and then went to the rest of the studios telling them these other studios are going to make it for that money. So Cartoon Network got all the small studios to compete with each other, right? Because they would not share information or should share force to say, hey guys, charging these to make a game is fucking stupid. Let's not do it. Do not accept to make this project for less than, I don't know, like 20 grand or whatever. Do not do it for 10. It's not sustainable. You're going to destroy it for everybody, right? So sharing information and being open about it, and maybe expose yourself to be taken advantage of, is crucial to actually get stronger and get access to more opportunities. Yeah. Is very, very, very important. You cannot survive on your own if you live in a country like Portugal or Argentina. So share information, have a place where you feel safe sharing information with people. You don't need to share information with everybody, but if I've known you, I've seen you for 2 years, I know you have a studio, I visited your studio. I know who you are, right? I have a good idea of who you are. Maybe it's fine to share information with you because we are both trying to do the same thing, right? Maybe I'm not going to share information with somebody I don't know, but with you, it's fine. So let's share that information and be open about it, and let's not try to backstab each other because it's going to act against that eventually. I don't know. That's it.
Yep, that's great advice. Okay, so I'm the one that's going to stop this because it's now ridiculously over time. We're like an hour and a half in. I think we're abusing you.
All right, that's fine.
Daniel, I just really want to thank you for accepting the invitation. I think all of us here learned something today. And hope to see in touch. Would you like to share maybe like your contact information if anyone wants to follow you, something like it, like your Twitter handle or something?
Oh yeah, I have a Twitter. My Twitter is Daniel Ben, Ben, on Twitter. If you want to follow me, that's fine. Sometimes I do fun stuff or tweet about fun stuff, or sometimes I stream myself doing development. Sometimes I don't. I don't know. But if you feel interested, also my mail. I'm not going to tell you my mail because my last name is hard to spell, and I'm not even going to bother. But if you look for it on Google, you're going to find it. If you ever want to contact me to ask questions or whatever,
your name with everyone.
I am very easy to reach. So just reach out. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. That's it, I guess. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, bye. Bye then.